Everdark, Episode 100, Aggression. Last on Everdark, Damon believes he is hearing Callie's voice as he and Julian charm their way into the museum gala. Callie reminds him that he's always been loyal, but the other immortals were not, and perhaps what he did was for the best. Damon attempts to warn Julian that he is not like him, the vampires, or the other immortals. Now we return to Christian. The Bridge of Passing was more evocative than its initial name would have led Christian to believe. It was a curved wooden bridge that crossed a rushing silver-black stream of water. Or Christian thought it was water, but it could have been anything, though its smell seemed like water on Earth, only fresher, cleaner. It had a cold smell like snow and frozen stone.
Mountain snows,
Caemorn said. Christian's eyebrows rose.
I thought only the Iros can read minds.
and you would be right.
Caemorn dipped his head in acknowledgement. The hilt of Dawnbreaker sparkled when he moved as light from the twin moons caught it.
You were looking at the river so intently, your thoughts were practically taking physical form.
Yes, I was wondering.
Christian shook his head. Now wasn't the time to become fascinated by minutiae. He could already feel Balthazar poking his mind. His master was being polite and not simply looking into his thoughts, but that wouldn't last at the rate his worry was growing.
I'm wondering about everything in this place.
Christian gestured around the three of them. The white stone road that wound through those impossibly large and deep green trees to the light of the spire in the far distance. Fiona had teleported them from there after Caemorn had drained 3 of the former vampires nearly to death. He had done it without seeming any desire or hunger. He'd let them fall like sacks of grain to the ground in full swoons. It was a workmanlike and efficient act. The only emotion Caemorn had showed was when they'd heard howls of werewolves in the distance, and he'd whispered the names of his former pets, Tarn and Farun. But then, Christian's expression and thoughts had become like a mirror that showed Christian nothing but his own worries.
Yes, it is fascinating.
Caemorn agreed with a nod.
Before I was forced into the role of preceptor.
Oh, forced?
Fiona did not hide her disdain for what she clearly thought of as a lie. She was staring back at the spire as if she wanted to go back to the lights and other vampires more than anything. A muscle in Caemorn's jaw tightened, but he answered blandly,
It was never my choice. I enjoy power, yes, but I truly have always wanted to be an academic and adventurer. I wanted to map the Everdark, understand some of its wonders and horrors, and bring back that knowledge to the vampires.
Fiona didn't say anything, but Christian felt her disbelief loud enough for her to have almost spoken out loud. He didn't necessarily agree with her. She was too prejudiced to see any good in Caemorn, and maybe she had a point. He was powerful and dangerous. He likely shouldn't be trusted. But there was something about him that reminded Christian of Loki, a being that could cause great mischief, but also had a point to the actions he took.
Julian and I see ourselves that way,
Christian said. Again, a nod.
Your show, of course. It's quite good.
Christian's forehead furrowed.
You've watched it?
Caemorn gave him a dry smile.
Yes, I had to keep track of your progress, in case you found Nightfallen.
Oh, yes. So not out of interest then.
Christian was surprised that he felt nettled by this.
On the contrary, I quite enjoyed it. I am hoping that after these troubles pass, that you will continue on with your adventuring and the recording of it.
Caemorn said generously.
Julian and I are already thinking about it. Now that we know about Everdark, we need to explore it.
Christian couldn't help the enthusiasm growing in his voice. Exploring was something that connected his first and second lives. He wanted to continue doing so very much.
It would be an even bigger hit among vampires.
Caemorn coughed and said with a bit of discomfort.
I would be happy to accompany you on your adventures.
You will be in a jail cell most likely, or turned back into a mortal.
Fiona said this as she turned on her heel to face them both. She softened her tone as she said to Christian,
We should get a move on. Everdark is very dangerous, and the more time you spend outside the city walls, the more attention we draw to ourselves from the wrong sort.
Christian thought of the creatures that Damon had so effortlessly summoned, and his hands dropped down onto the hilts of his daggers. They weighed practically nothing, but the metal felt good and solid against his palms.
Yes, you're right. I think I was focusing on the river because I'm a little worried about what's ahead, but we need to move,
Christian said. When Christian started to simply walk ahead at normal speed, Caemorn let out a small laugh. Christian jerked his head towards Caemorn, frowning.
What?
Christian demanded to know. Caemorn put a light hand on his shoulder. Christian tensed, and he quickly removed it, but said,
Relax, Christian. I am not criticizing you, but you don't have to act human here.
Christian frowned again. That answer didn't elucidate things at all.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Walking places. We need to get somewhere fast and we can't use teleportation.
Caemorn gestured to Fiona. She crossed her arms over her chest and answered tightly.
I have explained why I cannot simply teleport us to the Well of All Souls, and if I just teleported us to the farthest spot I see,
She pointed into the eternal twilight ahead of them.
things will be drawn to us. Believe me, you don't want that.
She shuddered.
Quite.
Caemorn turned back to Christian.
But we have other skills than teleportation,
Like...
Christian's eyebrows rose.
such as running very fast without tiring.
Caemorn said, and then did just that. He darted over the bridge and skidded to a stop 10 feet from the edge of it. He'd been practically a blur. He spread his arms wide.
See? Stop thinking like a human, Christian. Embrace your inner vampire.
Caemorn again started running ahead of them. Christian turned to Fiona. She shrugged.
Whatever gets us there and back faster, Christian.
She told him. He nodded, and they both ran. Christian let out a stunned gasp at the speed he was easily able to maintain. The world, conversely, seemed to slow down around him, even as the trees were a blur. He easily reached Caemorn's side, and the three of them ran together. He could see both Caemorn and Fiona clearly, as they were running at the same speed. He laughed. Fiona joined him. Caemorn even smiled. They ran without a break for 30 minutes. Christian felt no exhaustion. His limbs were as fresh as they had been when they'd started out. The reds and blue moons of the Everdark seemed to fill him with energy. He felt almost drunk with the light and the trees and the mysterious white path that led them far away from any sort of civilization. Going this fast also meant that they avoided many of the Everdark's creatures too. He'd heard the roar of many monsters that caught sight of them rapidly fade away as they simply outpaced them. But then Caemorn had reached out and gestured for them to slow and stop.
Let us take a break for a moment.
Caemorn advised. Christian did, and realized he wasn't even breathing hard, nor was he sweating.
I feel fine.
I am glad you do, but you are still new and can overexert yourself easily, and we do not have Balthazar here to feed you.
Caemorn reminded him. Balthazar was probing a little harder now. He had said he was going to let his master know their plans when they reached the bridge, but he had thought better of it. Balthazar was quite capable of ordering him home, and unlike his parents, he could truly make Christian obey.
I will tell him when we're at the well. That way he'll let me stay, as I will already be in danger.
He knew that this statement wasn't really logical. It was like a child trying to rationalize doing something they knew they should not do.
But I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adult.
But he knew that wasn't exactly legitimate either. He was a child when it came to being a vampire. And he had released a prisoner, a powerful prisoner who had been his master's rival. Not to mention them taking magical weapons that could have dusted him from the vault, only to now be in the middle of a forest, heading for a sacred well to talk to the dead.
That sounds bad. That sounds dangerous. But it'll be worth the risks in the end to free Julian's parents. And he would eventually have to allow me to do this anyway. This is the only way to reach the Harrows, so I'm just being efficient.
Balthazar would not buy that argument. He wondered if masters grounded their fledglings or punished them in other ways for disobedience. He supposed they did. But Balthazar wouldn't. Would he?
Even if he does, it's worth it.
Christian turned to look back at the way they had come with his hands on his hips. He felt a sudden sense of disorientation as the spire was no longer in sight. Only a faint light could be seen on the far horizon, and Christian took a step back the way they had come. Fiona grasped his arm gently. When he looked at her questioningly, she gave him a look of understanding.
We'll be back to civilization soon enough. The Everdark, for all its wonders, does cause a certain kind of homesickness. It makes one feel one's insignificance.
Again, I thought only Iros could read minds.
Christian told her with a grateful smile.
I remember my first time traveling out into the Everdark,
She said, and her gaze went distant.
I was following the edge of a deep lake, silvered by the moons. It was so beautiful. My heart ached just looking at it. I was halfway around it before I realized how far I had gone. And then, the moon night that made the water's surface like a mirror was disturbed and I could see beneath the surface for a moment.
What did you see?
He leaned forward eagerly to her. Her gaze was still unfocused.
A city, far below the surface, and there were beings living in it.
Mermaids and mermen?
Christian was charmed at the idea, but the thought of them living in dark water wasn't altogether comforting. Fiona's expression told him that she didn't feel comforted either.
They were beautiful, but I would say they were more like sirens who lured people to their deaths in the deep.
Christian's eyes went wide.
I suppose that makes sense. Everything here is rather aggressive.
They would have to be in order to survive. With vampires and immortals here, think of what they're up against.
Caemorn said, having silently followed their conversation.
And speaking of creatures of the Everdark, there are some nearby that you might be interested in, Christian.
When people find our free audio stories on Spotify or YouTube, they often ask, how is something with the high quality of Edward Fox and all those amazing actors still free? Well, the answer is, it isn't. I and my team are supported by memberships. I run my own private website, wraithrain.com. On this website, I've published gay romance, written stories, manga, and now uncensored podcasts since 2010. It's like my own version of Patreon, which I started because at that time, Patreon didn't exist. If you love this podcast and want to support the creation of more like it, consider joining us as a member and getting access to exclusive members-only stories. I'll tell you how to sign up and what you'll get at the end of this chapter.
Christian left the path and gestured with his fingertips for Christian and Fiona to follow after him.
We shouldn't leave the path, Caemorn.
Fiona hissed.
This is definitely how people get in trouble.
I assure you that we are in no danger from these particular creatures, considering my skills, Fiona.
Caemorn whispered, though he did not turn to look at her. All three of them crouched low so that their heads were just above the underbrush. At first, Christian didn't understand what had attracted Caemorn's attention, let alone what should interest him. But then he felt almost a cold caress on his skin, his breath frosted.
Ghosts!
His right hand dove into his pocket as he thought that David had escaped the gem, but it was not him that was sucking all the warmth out of the air. Caemorn had dropped to his haunches inside a group of bushes. He signaled for Christian to join him. Both he and Fiona silently glided to Caemorn's sides. That was when Christian saw the blue-white glow of the ghosts. They were like he had seen in old movies that represented ghosts as women in white drifting around ruins. In fact, there were ruins there. A small cottage, perhaps where these women had lived. They had long hair and wore ragged gowns that obscured their feet and never touched the ground. They let out a soft sound, humming, moaning. It was a sad sound that immediately had Christian thinking of rainy days where the cloud cover was more like an anvil hanging over his head than a cozy respite from the sun. The ghosts' faces were of two pretty women. Both of them looked to be in their 20s or 30s. If the ages they presented now were accurate, it was highly unlikely that they had died of natural causes. Disease was still a possibility, but Christian was betting that they had met a violent fate. Wasn't that necessary to make a ghost? Or were these ghosts just spirits that had always been this way.
Are they the souls of people who have died?
Christian asked Caemorn. Caemorn gave a single nod, his eyes never leaving them.
Why would they have been living out here, so far from the spire?
Fiona whispered.
Perhaps the spire did not exist when they lived here. Perhaps the sun shone in the Everdark then.
Caemorn murmured. Fiona's head jerked towards Caemorn.
That's heresy.
Caemorn gave her an even look.
Because Daemon is the greatest and creator of all things. He has not said he created the Everdark, has he?
What are you two talking about?
Christian's brow furrowed.
There are two theories about the Everdark.
Fiona explained.
One is that it is the sacred homeworld to the immortals, and that everything you see here was created by them.
I don't think so from what Daemon said.
Christian murmured. Both Fiona and Caemorn looked at him intently. He was a little surprised by their intentness at first, but then he realized how normal it was for them to be this way. He was speaking of their origins, of the immortals' origins.
I don't know for sure,
Christian said carefully.
but Daemon has indicated that he and the immortals came from somewhere else. That's all. That they found this place. But I could be wrong.
Well, it would work into the other story about the Everdark.
Caemorn said.
Which is...
They banished the light and caused all the vegetation and beings who lived in this place before they came to transform into the creatures we see now.
Caemorn explained.
Huh. That would make them even more powerful than I thought.
Christian admitted. He turned to Fiona.
Why don't the vampires like that story? They'd be far more aggressive than the ones I've met.
He used the same term that he had to describe the creatures here.
Because we view the Everdark as our home, not conquered territory.
She admitted.
But I see how this history would appeal to some.
So you think maybe they were killed when the immortals came here?
Christian asked Caemorn. The Calais vampire shrugged.
Possibly. No person in their right mind lives so far out from the cities.
Some do.
Fiona broke in.
I have heard that many vampires have gone out to find quieter places to live and
Either never returned or come back battered and nearly half dead again. None of them have ever been the same again.
Caemorn said sharply.
Even if they could stay out there, say by your lake, eventually the creatures would take them down or worse.
Maybe it'll be different now, with Daemon back.
Christian suggested. Fiona and Caemorn both considered this. Fiona rubbed her arms as if suddenly cold. Caemorn shrugged.
Anything is possible with him,
Caemorn said.
I do not understand his desire to associate with these beings.
Fiona admitted.
Maybe he likes seeing what he has wrought on his enemies.
Caemorn replied dryly.
He's not cruel like you are, Caemorn.
Fiona frowned deeply at him.
I would not be so sure. To be king of a predator species, he must be ruthless, if nothing else.
Caemorn pointed out. Christian blocked out their soft bickering as he watched one ghost pass through the white stone walls of the structure and then pass back in again. There was what looked like the remnants of a hearth that one continued to pace in front of, while her sister, he already thought of them as related and sisters, not mother and daughter due to the closeness in age, circled the whole of the cottage.
Now, I did not bring you out here simply to observe.
Caemorn breathed in Christian's left ear.
What did you bring me here for? Oh, you want me to try and talk to them?
Christian pointed to the ghosts.
Indeed. Practice, practice, practice.
Caemorn repeated.
But these ghosts aren't like the Harrow spirits,
Christian observed.
These spirits seem... Whoa!
He let out a startled cry as Caemorn pushed him out of the bushes and towards the ghosts. He looked back at the Calais vampire with annoyance and alarm. Fiona was about to move and get him, but Caemorn had her right wrist. She could have teleported over to Christian regardless of that hold, or she could have simply struck Caemorn in the face and dashed to Christian. But she was holding back. Maybe she, too, knew that this was good for him to try out before they got to the well. Christian turned back to the cottage and jerked back as he saw both ghosts were well aware of him now and standing, or floating at the edge of the cottage, looking at him. There wasn't exactly surprise on their faces, and there certainly wasn't a welcoming look either, but they weren't attacking him.
Though, even if they did, What could they do to me? They're incorporeal.
Christian opened his mind and reached for theirs, but at the last moment he pulled back. It was rude to simply reach into another person's mind. He had to introduce himself. Besides, he'd never had to do anything more than speak to reach the dead before. He cleared his voice and said,
Hello, my name is Christian. What are yours?
They did not answer. They continued to float and stare. Christian glanced over his shoulder at Caemorn for instruction, but the Kali vampire just shrugged and urged him to keep going. Christian turned back to the ghosts.
I'm a speaker to the dead.
Christian explained to them. The ghost on the right tilted her head to the side. Perhaps that was a good sign. She was responding to him at least.
And I would like to speak with you.
He winced. He was really sounding like an idiot. He took a step towards them. The ghost on the left jerked her head back. He stopped and held out his hands in a placating manner.
Don't be afraid. I mean you no harm. Indeed, I simply want to converse with you.
He assured them.
But can they understand English? Why would they? I'm hoping my powers do some kind of translating.
But that was ridiculous. There was no translation here, not unless he touched their minds. He would have to do that because thoughts had no language.
I'm going to touch your minds. I am an Iros vampire,
he explained, which, of course, if they did not understand English, would not prepare them at all for what he was about to do.
Here goes nothing.
He opened his mind again like Balthazar had taught him, and reached for the ghosts' minds. He could feel them immediately. They were two cool, cold orbs. His mind circled them as if looking for a door. The ghost on the right's eyes started to narrow. That was when he saw the keyhole, or what was the equivalent of that in their minds. He could unlock it and open it up and go through. Their pretty faces were still blank, maybe a little suspicious, but still not aggressive. He smiled at them tremulously. He was going to touch the minds of beings that had existed on Everdark for who knew how long. He was going to learn things from them that maybe only Damon knew. Going into the minds of ghosts. Ghosts was the ultimate adventure. Christian opened their locks and touched their minds. He was smiling broadly at them, and that was when he heard what they were thinking for the first time.
Kill him?
The ghost on the left seemed to ask the one on the right. The ghost on the right smiled then.
Yes, let's.
Join us next time for episode 101, Chosen.
What else do you get as a member of WraithRain.com besides the unedited audio versions of Everdark, Dragon's Reign, and the Sexy Times or Empire of Stars? I write a lot of stories. Far more than Dragon's Reign and Everdark. Everdark is just one of my gay, romantic, epic-length adventures. Since 2010, I've written long gay romance web novels with hot heroes falling in love with each other, whether it's honorable elven warriors, fierce dragon shifters, sensual mermen, fallen angels and demons, and reincarnated immortal vampires. When you join, you can read all of these on my serial membership site. The completed stories are there in full for you to read as fast as you want. And the ongoing stories get 3 chapters every week, so I can torture you with cliffhangers. I mean, entertain you, not torture. Cat, who wrote this script? But don't worry, you can tell me exactly what you think of that in the comments at the end of every chapter. As a member, you can be in my own personal peanut gallery. There's also manga. My first foray into romance was actually yaoi manga. And since the very beginning, I've collaborated with artists to create both Western and Asian graphic novels that are posted 1 page at a time in the members-only area. Even if you're not a manga person per se, when you're a member, you get them free. So why not check out the amazing detailed work of our artists while waiting for me to post the next chapter? If this sounds interesting to you, try us out for a month. The link to sign up is in the notes. The most you'll pay is $9.95 a month, and you'll be directly supporting us, real people, not big corporations like Amazon or Netflix, not content created with AI, Wraith Rain is a small team of actual humans doing the best we can to transport you with romantic action and adventure stories. We really thank you for your support.